Hi everyone, and welcome to our video where we are going to be having a look at some questions on separation techniques. So our first question here says, describe how the process of distillation shown in figure 2 produces pure water from salt solution. So when we have a look at the apparatus which has been set up, we can see that we've got a flask and we've got a salt solution which is being heated, probably by a Bunsen burner. What's going to happen is the water is going to evaporate and go up, and it's going to go through this condenser. Now this condenser is to change the state from gas back to a liquid, because when we heat the water up, the liquid is going to change into a gas because we're boiling the water. And once the water has turned into a gas, so it turns into a gas at about this point, okay, and the gas will pass through this condenser. Okay, and when it passes through this condenser, the purpose of it is to change the water from a gas back to a liquid. And the reason why we want to do that is because we want to separate out the salt from the water. So we have separated out the water into a gas. We need to change it back to a liquid, and we need to collect it in a separate beaker. And that's what you can see. The water is sort of being let out into this beaker, and this will keep on going until all the water has evaporated from this flask and we're just left with the salt. So putting that into words, it says describe how the process of distillation shown in figure 2 produces pure water from salt solution. There are some key phrases that you need to use to get the 4 marks in this question, and we've looked at some of those phrases. We can see that we've talked about evaporation, the water evaporates. We've also talked about condensation. We can see that the water vapor turns into liquid form, it turns into a water. So looking at the mark scheme, what you need to be saying is that the solution is heated. That's what we discussed when we heated the salt solution and the water evaporates to turn into a gas. If you said water evaporates, that will get you another mark. Then we talked about the water vapor condensing from the condenser. So it cools, and because it's cooling, that's the purpose of the condenser. It changes it back into its liquid state. Okay. So it cools in the condenser, and that's what causes it to turn back into a liquid. That's where your next mark is coming from. And then you will have pure water, which is being collected in the beaker. So you have 5 potential marking points in this question. You only need 4 of them, and you will get the 4 marks. As you can see, you can probably explain what's going on in the image, but it's really important that you get familiar with the mark scheme. Again, this is a model mark scheme answer, so you can make yourself a flashcard with this mark scheme on and learn it. These are the keywords that you are expected to know in terms of an exam. Okay, so moving on for the next question, it says substances are separated from a mixture using different methods. Draw one line from each substance and mixture to the best method of separation. So we've got ethanol and water. So those are our 2 mixtures. We need to separate them. Now, ethanol and water, they are both liquid. When we are separating out 2 liquids, we would use fractional distillation. Fractional distillation is to separate out 2 liquids that have similar boiling point. Okay, so we would do ethanol and ethanol water. We would match it up to the fractional distillation. Then we've got salt and seawater. Now you could use distillation to separate out salt from seawater, but the way that we can also do it is by crystallization. Crystallization, we will form salt crystals once we separate out the salt from the water. Simple distillation can be used, but that's not an option over here. So we would do salt from seawater to crystallization. And then it says the different colors in black ink, and the one that we would use for ink would be chromatography. So we would match that up there for 3 marks. So if we go through the mark scheme, we can see ethanol and ethanol water is fractional distillation. We can see salt from seawater is crystallization, and the different colors in black ink is chromatography. Okay, then we're given this. We're given an apparatus set up over here. We need to suggest one improvement to this apparatus. So we can see we've got our mixture, we've got a beaker, and we're pouring it into a flask. And we've got filter paper cone that is at the top of the conical flask. Now, one improvement straight away, we're just using the filter paper. Now that filter paper has to rest on something to make sure that it's stable. So to improve this, we would use a filter funnel. We would put the filter paper onto a filter funnel and then place it onto a conical flask. And that will ensure that the filter paper has some stability and none of the mixture spills out either side of the conical flask. So the improvement that we would add to this diagram would be to include a filter funnel. Okay. Next question, it says complete the sentences, choose answers from the box. So it says in simple distillation, the mixture is heated to make the liquid what? And then it says the vapor is cooled to make it what? So in simple distillation, the mixture is heated to make the liquid. We have to choose an answer from the box. So it's to evaporate it. And then the vapor is cooled to make it condense. Okay, that's the purpose of heating the liquid, is to evaporate it, and when we're cooling it down, it's to condense it. So this question you would find on a foundation paper because it's a fill in the gap question. However, you can use some of those questions to bring about knowledge on how they can assess you in terms of exam questions. That's why I've included it on this slide. Then over here, we've got a method. It says rock salt is a mixture of sand and salt. Salt dissolves in water. Sand does not dissolve in water. Some students separated rock salt. This is the method that they use. So we can see that they've placed the rock salt in a beaker. They've added in 100 centimeters cubed of cold water. They've allowed the sand to settle to the bottom of the beaker. They've carefully poured the salty water into an evaporating dish and heated the contents of the evaporating dish with a Bunsen burner until the salt crystals start to form. So we can see a bit of crystallization going on there. It then says suggest one improvement to step 2 to make sure that all the salt has dissolved in the water. So we've got salt in a beaker and we've just added 100 centimeters cubed of cold water. Now, if you just add in a liquid to a solute, all of that solute is not going to dissolve straight away. You're going to have to stir it in order for it to dissolve. And that's the improvement that you're going to add to this method. You can stir it or you could heat it. If you heat it, it can also break the bonds, and that's what's going to make sure that the salt has dissolved in the water. But you could have said any of the following. If you heated it, that's going to make sure that the salt has dissolved in the water. Or you could have said stir. That would also make sure that the salt has dissolved in the water. Again, common exam question, this one, so make a note of it. Okay. One more question over here. We've got the same method. It says the salty water in step 4 still contained very small grains of sand. Suggest one improvement to step 4 to remove all the sand. So step 4 says carefully pour the salty water into an evaporating dish. Okay, so we've said that the sand has to settle to the bottom of the beaker, and then we're going to just pour the salty water into the evaporating dish. Now, to make sure that the sand has properly been removed, we can filter out the sand. We can use our filter funnel, filter paper, and we can filter that solution into another beaker. And that will ensure that none of the solid grains of sand can pass through into the other beaker. So that's one improvement that we could do. We could filter using a filter funnel and filter paper to ensure that the sand is left behind and doesn't follow with the solution into the new beaker. Then it says, suggest one safety precaution the student should take in step 5. So in step 5, we are heating the contents. So when we are heating using a Bunsen burner, there's some standard safety precautions that you should make. And these are some of the safety precautions that you could state. You could wear safety spectacles or you can wear an apron. Any of these would get you the mark. Okay, so this one is a common exam question as well, so please make a note of it in your notes, just so you're aware of it. You can also make a flashcard on it because it comes under your required practical skills, and this is a required practical that you are expected to know about. So safety precautions, you could wear safety spectacles or wear an apron. And that's it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I wish you the best of luck with your revision. I'll see you in the next video.